Realignment talks. It's been everything that's been going through the college football and college athletics world over the last week or so, and the Big 12 and Texas Tech are right in the center of them. I'll take a look at how the new realignment talks have impacted Texas Tech and what I expect going forward on today's episode of Locked On Texas Tech.
Are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi everybody, I am Emory Lyda, your host of Locked On Texas Tech. It is a beautiful Friday afternoon out here as we talk about the newest developments in the realignment stuff going on in the college football and college athletic world. And they really do involve Texas Tech and the Big 12 as a whole. So it's really important to be discussing them. But as we get into the realignment talk, it's going to be one of those things that's going to continue to evolve over the course of the offseason and into the season. And with that, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before, including who is going to be the next members of the Big 12 Conference. BetOnline, where the game starts. And the Big 12, a couple years ago, even into last season when Texas and Oklahoma announced their departure, a lot of people thought they might be the dead man walking, but suddenly it has turned around over the last week or so. And to now, the Big 12 has the chance to establish themselves as the third power conference in line. So to give a little bit of a recap, and I'm going to plug our most recent Big 12 roundtable, which you can check out on the Locked On Texas Tech feed on Wednesday, I believe it was. But you can check out the discussion there. But to recap, we already know that in the SEC, Oklahoma and Texas are being added. We know now that there's potential for the SEC to add teams such as Miami, Florida State, North Carolina. Those teams are all on the table for the SEC. Could also see them bringing on another team or two from the ACC, but they're more or less looking at about 20 teams. We've seen the Big Ten allegedly extend invites to UCLA and USC. That was kind of the first big domino that took effect here. That would bring them to 16 teams. We've also heard rumors that they're holding out for Notre Dame. That is something else. Washington and Oregon were at one point believed to be in discussions with the Big Ten, but that has kind of dissipated a little bit, and it seems like they are now content with just adding UCLA and USC. But in the meantime, the Big 12, this is where they start to get into this. So after the Pac-12 had the whole thing go on with USC and UCLA allegedly announcing their departure, that brings into question the future of the Pac-12 as a conference and what we believe is going to result in the conference landscape going forward, because it's entirely possible that the Pac-12 is going to be gone after all of this, because the Pac-12 has a current media deal that expires in 2024. A lot of teams seem to be trying to jump ship and get away from it, so they're not bound in by that media deal. And when looking at the conference realignment, there's a lot of reason to believe that the Big 12 is in a better state right now, already bringing in 12 teams that are set in stone. We already have a conference that has a new media deal set to be negotiated within the next year. So that is going to be really interesting to watch. And so the Pac-12 teams now with USC and UCLA, the two biggest media giants in the conference and arguably the two most valuable teams alongside maybe Oregon, those two leaving brings a big void into the conference. Oregon and Washington, seemingly the next two sought-out resources. They're teams that have also been speculated by the Big 12 as being additions. And then you have four teams that have already been typically mentioned as being targeted by the Big 12. Those are Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. And this all met with Big 12 officials on Tuesday night. That's what we've been led to believe. As an outsider when it comes to Big 12 news, I'm not exactly sure how that meeting went. for everything from announcements are imminent within the next couple of days to nothing happened. So there's a lot of speculation there. Reportedly, everything's on the table. We could see the Big 12 poaching all of those schools. We could see a merger between the Big 12 and the Pac 12. But as a whole, the big thing to take away from this, and really the first segment of this podcast, is really just this has all gone down extremely fast. Like, I was gone last weekend. I didn't check my phone from Thursday until Saturday, really. I come back, I see the UCLA USC news just completely taking off. I've seen rumors of Arizona State joining the Big 12. You see rumors about Oregon and Washington being shunned from the Big 10. And then personally affecting me, you see rumors about UNC possibly joining the SEC. So it's all kicked off over the last week. And this is an opportunity for the Big 12. This is a conference that at one point looked like it was going to be that fourth or fifth power conference now, without Texas and Oklahoma, the two biggest media markets in the conference. Now losing both of them, you lose a lot of control. And now the discussion is, if you can add 5 or 6 teams, make it a super conference, an 18-team conference, suddenly your value as a conference goes way up. And even if none of those teams have the higher media market value of a USC or UCLA, if you can add that much power into the Big 12, I think it's obvious to be able to do it and really not take no for an answer. You have the leverage now over the Pac 12, whose conference is continuing to collapse. But enough about that talk. Coming up next, I'm going to talk about exactly what an 18-team Big 12 would look like. And then further down the line, I'm going to end talking about what Texas Tech should do on all this. But first, I've got a message, and I've got a message from one of our returning sponsors in Bet Online, who also conveniently sponsored our podcast today. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's MLB season, which is fully in swing. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this entire season. BetOnline.net is the fastest way and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events. That includes MMA, boxing, golf, racing, tennis, whatever you need to see. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Back talking about the Big 12 conference realignment, and I've spent the first segment talking about sort of just all the news that's gone down over the last week, and it's a lot. And just a heads up, if I forgot anything, please let me know in the comments. Please DM me, do whatever. You can comment on our YouTube. I won't take it personally if you DM me criticizing me on Twitter about it. I know I've been away and there's so much to cover that I might have missed something. So I want to preface this with this. But when it comes to an 18-team Big 12, which seems to be the maximum that we're looking at, if all 6 of the teams in Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State are added, that would leave the Big 12 with 18 teams. And so taking a look at what you could do with an 18-team conference, you have about 3 different ways I could think of in formatting this. The first, the traditional division splits. You do nine teams per division. In football, this would look like an 8-team, playing all 8 teams in your division, and then one random opponent each year from the other division. That would give you a 9-game conference schedule. And then in basketball, that would look like 17 one opponent games, and then one team every year that you play twice against. That would give you 18 conference games in the basketball season. So feasibly, you would look at the two division structure in football being one way to work it out. So that's one way that this could work out. Then the other way you could see this happening is 3 6-team pods. And in this case, the way I've looked at it in football is you play all 5 teams in your pod, and then you play two of the other 6 teams in each of the other pods. That would be a total of 9 football games. Basketball, same thing as the other 18-game schedule. You're looking at 17 against one team, 1 against 2. Or you could do other formats on that. But I think the biggest thing is making sure on the football side you get that squared away. The advantages to a 6-team pod is you're playing more unique teams each season, and you're not stuck playing against basically the same 8 teams every single year. So I think that's a good idea, but I think one of the more really intriguing aspects of this would be 6 3-team pods that go, 3-team pods that go along with this. And so you're going to play the 2 teams in your pod, and then the rest of the 5 pods, you're going to play all 5, one of them from each of the 5 pods, as well as 2 wild card games. And that would give you 9 total opponents in football. Again, basketball will be the same way. And with this, you're just looking at best total record. Go to the conference championship. I'm sure there'd be a million different tiebreakers to set up there. But on the football side of things, the six different pods of 3 seems like one of the more feasible ways. If there's 16 teams, the calculus becomes a lot easier. I think it'd be obvious to see a 4-team, 4-pod system going on there, which we've already seen outlined in various different conferences. So I'd expect that to be a possible outcome, but certainly the pod system seems like the popular way to go with new conference expansion being imminent. So that's some of the structural deals. But looking at how the TV deal goes and how the marketing side of this and what new Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark is going to have to deal with when he gets onto the scene, you're looking at a guy in Brett Yormark that has a lot of experience with Rock Nation. We talked about it on last week's Big 12 Roundtable, which got posted here on Tuesday. But this conference is one that has a new media deal coming up soon. You've got realignment coming soon. But really the biggest thing is you have got to make sure that this TV deal goes well. And when you have 18 teams, you have media markets stretching 4 different time zones actually, West Virginia, West Virginia and UCF, and I believe Cincinnati as well, all in the Eastern time zone. Obviously the Central, we don't need to go into that. Mountain time with Utah and then stretching all the way to Oregon and Washington in this hypothetical. You have a really unique situation where you could really have a lot of interesting leverage when it comes to the TV markets and being able to spread your games, having the flexibility and the variety that allows you to play in pretty much any time slot. And that's going to be a value to TV deals. You'd also be, in this case, adding 2 pretty strong regional markets in Seattle and the Portland area through Oregon and Washington, in addition to the Arizona Phoenix area with Arizona and Arizona State. All of those areas we've seen that are probably some of the most valuable in the Pac-12 outside of UCLA and USC. Also have some name brand as well in there with Oregon and Washington, in addition to the Arizona schools, Utah and Colorado. All of those teams have some name brand value that comes close to what we see in the Big 12 already. So it's not like you're adding teams that won't add any sort of leverage chips in the conference realignment or in the conference TV deal discussion. So when I'm looking at this, I really do think that the key here for Texas Tech and for the Big 12 is getting into the right TV deal, whether 16 teams or 18 teams, and whether or not you have all this expansion taking place. The TV deal is going to be the integral part of this. And with the Pac-12 collapsing, now's the time to take advantage of it. But there's one question. If the Big 12 expands, is this where Texas Tech wants to be? I think there's a really clear answer with that for the time being. I'm going to talk about it next, but first, we have a message from one of our new sponsors, and that is LinkedIn. As the sun comes out and small businesses are back in business, LinkedIn Jobs makes it easier to grow your team. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the people that you want to interview faster and for free. Now, I personally know just how hard it can be to both be in the job market trying to find hires as well as being hired individually. But with LinkedIn, it is so easy to be able to do all of this. So you can create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then you can add your job to the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile and spread the word that you're hiring so that your network can help you find the right people to hire that are qualified and fit what you're looking for. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's while small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. And personally, as someone that has owned a small business in the past and utilized LinkedIn Jobs, I have to agree with this rating. It is excellent. So LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Back here talking about Texas Tech and how they fit into the Big 12 realignment discussion. And all of this 18 team talk is great and all. I think the Big 12 has a very good foundation to build off of already with the 12 teams. But when you look at what the rest of the Big 12 and everything can bring, it's still going to pale in comparison to what the SEC is going to be bringing in, and even the Big 10 going forward with now UCLA and USC joining them. So I have to think that in terms of money, the Big 12, the best they can hope for is being a clear third in the power conference hierarchy. And is that something Texas Tech wants to be in? Or do you try to push for a Big 10 or an SEC invite? And I've taken the time to take a look at some of the input from Texas Tech fans on this matter, and it seems like there's a pretty decent split on it. A lot of people are content with being in the Big 12 and being in what will be the third best power conference if everything goes to plan. But there are some people that want the Big 12 to kind of continue expanding, but also see Texas Tech needing to try their best to get an SEC invite or a Big 10 invite to maximize their potential. And while this sounds good in theory, I really do think that the best, most efficient, reasonable avenue for Texas Tech to take is to be one of the best teams in the new Big 12 and just really focus on doing the best they can to maximize their brand in the Big 12 conference, because getting to the SEC is going to take a lot of money and resources. And well, I'm sure Texas Tech has it. They have a very passionate fan base, a great donor base as well. I do think that there is questions about what you can bring to the table when it comes to SEC leverage, because SEC has already added the two flagship Big 12 programs. They have 14 strong foundations underneath. They're looking to teams like UNC, Miami, Florida State from the ACC that fit better geographically. And so you're going to have a hard time convincing an SEC to get you in. The Big Ten geographically makes no sense whatsoever, but at the same time, they just added two teams from California. So who knows what's going on there. But realistically, the SEC is where you would go. And to be honest with you, the SEC would provide more money. I think it'd obviously be a good thing financially and from a business standpoint, but you're going to have a hard time doing it. Being realistic about this podcast, you have to say that Texas Tech is not quite there from an athletic success standpoint and from a branding perspective as what the top tier SEC schools are. And that's totally fine. You know, those things change over time. I mean, over the last 20 years, we've seen the Mississippi schools continue to grow their brand. We've seen some development when it comes to Alabama. I mean, obviously they've been around and been a powerhouse in football forever, but just the dynasty they've been able to create. We've seen Clemson, the ACC, work themselves up to being a national powerhouse. We've seen a team like Louisville basically go from the Conference USA to being a factor in these realignment discussions just off the basis of their sports success. So these things can change over time. And just because you go in the Big 12 in this realignment cycle doesn't mean when things inevitably get split up going forward down 10 years down the line, you're going to have heavier, or you're not going to have better negotiation principles. Because if you're a bottom tier SEC school and you're having to scratch and claw your way into an invite, that is going to be quite a bit of a challenge. Whereas with the Big 12, it allows Texas Tech the opportunity to still have a lucrative media deal. It's not going to be SEC type money, but you're also not going to be splitting it with brands that already have a significant advantage over you from a financial standpoint. It allows you to establish yourself as now one of the powerhouses in the new Big 12, where you have some of the strongest facilities, some of the best backing, one of the best athletic programs when it comes to year after year success, especially in the Olympic sports. And you can rebuild your football program under Joe McGuire, and everything can look up for you in the Big 12. I think staying put for now, trusting what the Big 12 is doing, giving it a chance to see how the realignment goes. And then the next wave, now that you've seemingly survived getting possibly booted like it looks like you might be a year ago from the power conference spectrum with the Big 12 looking to become a mid-major almost. Now you're almost looking at being the third best conference, kind of falling into your lap. So there's a lot to like about the expansion talks here. I feel like for Texas Tech, it makes the most sense to just stay put. So I can understand it going both ways. I'm going to run a poll on Twitter about this because I think it's a really interesting topic. But from my standpoint, I think going with the Big 12, I don't want to see the Big 12 merging with the Pac 12. I've heard something about the ACC doing that, and I think at that point, that's a last ditch effort by both of them. Because if you're the ACC, you're losing your flagship schools possibly. If you're the Pac 12, you already kind of have. And by the end of next week, you could be looking at having 6 teams left, or even worse, only 4 teams left. So, with all this going on, it makes sense for the Big 12 to be really aggressive on pushing for realignment. It makes sense for Texas Tech to stick with the Big 12. And it makes sense for us to continue looking at what Texas Tech needs to do athletically to give themselves the best chance going forward in realignment talks. But that's going to start with a good, strong football program, a good basketball program, and much more. And trust me, we'll be talking about that next week on the podcast. Again, like I mentioned yesterday, we're going to be looking at a couple matchup previews. Hopefully, we're also going to be looking at our third position previews, looking at the wide receiver, and maybe even looking into the women's basketball program. And if I have time for an extra episode, we will be looking at basketball at some point, but that's all in the future. In the meantime, thank you for listening and watching to Texas Tech. You can follow Locked On Texas Tech. You can follow me on Twitter at Eraser41. You can follow the official Locked On Texas Tech account at Locked On TTU on Twitter. Again, I'm going to be posting a poll about this realignment stuff, so stay tuned for that. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We do appreciate any and all reviews, in addition to subscribing to our YouTube, continuing to try to develop the support there. I appreciate all the views we've had over the last week or two. It means a lot to me. We're going to continue growing the brand on YouTube. And you're going to be able to see everything that I'm doing going forward on there. I'm looking forward to continuing to making that a better, easier way to watch your favorite Locked On Texas Tech podcast. So thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. For a second listen, you can get more on the Big 12 by making Locked On Big 12 your second listen. Everyday host Josh Neighbors and the local experts of Locked On take you across the Big 12 in 30 minutes. Make Locked On Big 12 your second listen today. And if you already listened to some of the roundtable episodes from earlier this week, they are on the feeds. You can check them out. And if you want to listen to more Locked On Big 12 stuff, Josh does a really good job with that. You can check that out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, just like with Locked On Texas Tech. And in the meantime, that is all for this week. I will see you again on Monday. So thank you and goodbye.